My name is Simon. I play in the Slants.
And I'm Tyler. I also play in the Slants.
And we are here mostly to offer to chat about the music industry, apparently.
Yeah, that's what we're here for.
So I think we can do this one of two ways. This is a fairly intimate group. We can just like have a conversation, and or we can kind of go high level. But I think one thing that I would oftentimes recommend to folks is like thinking about like where you see yourself in the industry, because music industry is like a very, very big umbrella term. And if we take ourselves out of music and pretend it's any other industry, let's say the restaurant industry, there's a whole lot of people, there's a lot of functions within it. Like you might think, oh, it's about cooking food, but it's also servers, it's also house, it's managers. In the same way that the music industry encompasses record labels, booking agents, attorneys, and of course, musicians. And I think over the last 20 some odd years, I've had a lot of seats in many of these particular roles, although I prefer to be on the play in the back, play bass guitar kind of role. And then Tyler, longtime drummer of the band, has played many other roles as well, providing assistance to touring acts and that sort of thing. So we're happy to chat about either end of these things. And I'm kind of curious for folks here, who here's on the creator side? Do you want to be a performer, writer? Okay, and who wants to be on like the other side, like being a label, doing management or things like that? Okay, so a little bit of each here. So, we'll try and we can try and do stuff that kind of focuses on both, or maybe we'll kind of begin. Does anyone want to like kick us off with a question, and then we can kind of go from there?
Do you think getting yourself out there in the music industry is better, like self-promoting like YouTube, or signing with record labels, or like going through like a talent agency?
Okay, so being independent versus like like a gatekeeper route.
Mm-hmm.
I would say it depends on what your goal is.
Okay,
what are you trying to do? Are you trying to like maximize reach? Like you want to create music and art that reaches as many people as possible, and you don't really care about the money side? Do you care about doing it as a living, or is it kind of a both and situation?
Mostly both, yeah.
Mostly both. Okay. Do you want to?
Sure. Well, I mean, I think the route that you take is probably easiest, because it's harder just to be shopping yourself to labels, for example, without having something to show them of like, this is my fan base, these are the people following me, this is what I can give to you, and then having leverage in a contract, because we have plenty of musicians that we've met over the years who got record deals and they were all excited, and someone gave them a little money, and then it just tanked their career, and then nothing happened after that because they were stuck in this contract that didn't really do anything for them past the initial grant, essentially. And so approaching it as, I'm going to build my fan base and my career regardless of who wants to help me along the way. And if you are able to do it yourself without the help of a label, these days you don't really need a label. So.
Yeah, I would say nothing stops you at any point jumping ship from being an independent to somebody that's collaborating with a label. The more attractive you are to labels because you have that existing fan base, or like proven that you've kind of developed something that works, the better terms or better deals that you'll work out. And I think in many ways, the advantage of starting out independently is you can make a lot of mistakes and learn a whole lot along the way. And you can actually learn about what a label does, because essentially it's like if you're a self-published author, you learn everything about the publishing business, whether a book company is printing your books or not. You learn how to work with an editor, cover design, how to market yourself as an author, and that sort of thing. And the music is like very similar in that regard. And the more you learn about the industry as a whole, the more informed you are when you decide to bring on other people, management, talent, representation, labels, and that sort of thing. And so there's a lot of really great tools out there. My caveat is that there's a lot of people who prey upon artists because it seems like a really fun job. It's like a passion project, and there's a lot of people who will say like, hey, I will do X number of things for your career, or they'll provide a lot of advice, but they haven't actually lived that truth. They haven't actually proven what they have going on works. And so I'd be very mindful of people who make false promises, and mostly go with people who provide advice but have actually done something with it themselves, and they've actually lived into it. Unfortunately, I spend a lot of time traveling to like music industry conventions and presenting about these very same things, but I know that there are other presenters out there who like will brag about some artists they managed like 10 years ago, and they haven't done anything with them, and they'll charge a whole lot of money to consult artists, but they aren't actually doing anything of value. And so be mindful of that. But yeah, I would say definitely take the time to learn and grow as an artist, and at the same time figure out the business as you're going along with it. And if you decide you want to work with a label or something, like the deals are getting better nowadays. They're not quite as bad as when we started, but the better informed you are, and the more you understand your own audience, the better a deal you can cut.
Thank you.
Sure. Oh, there we go. Other folks have any questions? Yeah, you can come on up. We're like an open book, so you can ask anything and everything.
Speaking of books, Simon has quite a few books on these topics.
It's awesome. First one, learn how to use a mic, step one. I guess I just had two questions that I don't know how the two kind of go hand in hand. One's, I guess, basically, I'll just ask them. At what point did you decide to be like, not like a musician in the artistic sense, but as a career where, I mean, I already have an established career, and music has always just been in the background, something that I've always like looked at fondly, and then I've had a lot more resources to be able to pursue that. So as artists, at what point did you guys decide like, hey, like I can actually live off this? I can actually, it feeds the soul and the body. You know what I mean? And then the second question is, how do you find inspiration for music without like diluting your sound, if that makes sense? Like, oh
yeah.
Man, I really like, this guy really inspires me, but like, I don't want to be a copy of, this guy. I just, does that make sense?
Sure, absolutely. Well, do you want to tackle either one of those?
Oh, go ahead.
Okay. So first of all, I don't think there's anything wrong with being a working musician, like where you have like a certain career or path and you do music as well. We see that is common more and more now, just because a lot of the industry itself and the supports for artists is not what it used to be. You can have a hit song on Spotify that you get 1 million plays for, but getting $1,200 is not enough to live off of, because that's roughly your royalty for that. So it's like, it's hard to know exactly when, but I would say that if you're trying to decide, okay, at what point do I need to decide if I want to pursue this thing full time, I would say, like, again, set out with a very particular set of goals. Maybe it's like, okay, when I hit this certain threshold in terms of my income, when I hit this certain threshold in terms of my fan base or opportunities available to me where it makes sense for me to do this financially, and I feel very secure in that, that's probably like a better time than to just kind of go with feel or by like follower count or something like that. I always recommend like having those concrete goals in place, so you know at what point you feel really comfortable, and then you can plan around that and say, okay, if my goal is like, okay, I want to make at least $75,000 a year doing music before I make the decision to quit my day job, then you think, okay, how do I get to that number? Then you can start making a plan. So you could say, well, I only make $10,000 off of streaming, or $1,000 or $500 of streaming, so I got to come up with that other $70K plus, right? Maybe it's through performances, merch, crowdfunding, Patreon, whatever your mix is, you can think about all the different revenue sources available to you, but you can think, okay, now how do I invest my time into the ones that make the most sense? They bring the most return for me so that I can get to that point. And so you start kind of creating that plan. It gets more complicated when you have a group, like a band, like we had a band, because the more people in your band, the more revenue you need to be able to get to that point. Very early on in the Slants career, it was spring 2008, me and some of the early guys, Aaron, our lead singer who's here, we were all like, let's just all quit our jobs in May, and we're gonna do this full time. And our plan went to the end of the year, because we were like, we can tour, I have 6 months of bookings out, and we just toured the country, and it was great until apparently we ran into the worst recession since the Great Depression, and gas is super expensive, and it like really dramatically changed the landscape for us. So then we needed kind of this backup plans, and a lot of us went back to work and had to balance it for a long time. Sometimes that happens, and so it's good to have these kind of backup plans in place, but having those numbers in advance, preparing for that moment, whether it's you wanting to start your own business, because that's essentially what it is, that's what will kind of get you there. Do you want to tackle the inspiration part?
Yeah, sure. Well, I have something to say about this topic as well, as finding other ways to make revenue or income on top of playing music, whether it's passive income or things that you could do while traveling is also helpful. I mean, I think we were doing this before remote work really existed as an option, but even back in the day, like before smartphones, Simon and I had like little dongles on our laptops so that we could do remote work, and we were doing, booking for bands, graphic design, website design. Later on, I got into real estate, and Simon has as well, and so having passive income from our real estate investments made it possible to go do what we really wanted to do, which was to play music. And so finding things that could coexist with a music career and allow you that flexibility could be something to also strive for. Yeah. And then you never really have to quit either one. You could do both.
Yeah. It's nice to have benefits.
Yeah. So your question about inspiration, you can stop me if I'm wrong in the direction of this question, but I think. Is your question kind of should I follow the inspiration that I'm feeling, or let what I think will sell, or what my fans want to see dictate the?
Or is it like being afraid of absorbing too much of your influences, where you feel like you're imitating them instead of creating your own?
Yeah, I think the second one, just
okay.
Because I'm just interested in like creating like my own sound without like, oh, you're just you sound exactly like so and so because so and so is popular.
Yeah.
I mean, here's the thing. It's very hard to sound original. All of us are a product of everyone that came before us, and of the people in our lives. But what makes you unique is your particular combination of influences combined with your own life story and the subject matter, the experiences you've had to bring forward to that. I mean, for example, our band oftentimes gets compared with a bunch of like 80s synth pop acts like The Cure, Depeche Mode, and things like that. But because we bring in all these other elements of rock and roll and punk, and we combine that with our life experiences, all of a sudden it's something just a little bit new and a little bit different. Yeah. I mean,
and every time a new member joined the Slants, the music changed. I mean, all of our albums are very different from each other. When I joined, before we wrote new music, it was a lot more along that synth pop, 80s new wave, and then I brought a lot more like metal background, and so things got heavier, and then it kind of found a balance, and then Joe came on and brought a whole nother kind of texture of ambient music and really cool guitar layers and melodies, and
I mean, I would say, like, don't be afraid of like if you end up sounding like someone, especially if it's someone you really love, that's a pretty high compliment actually, to think like, oh, you're kind of like this, because in many ways that's kind of art. Like we're absorbing these things, but you can start over time figure out like what can you do that's different than anybody else. Maybe it's your interpretation, maybe it's through lyrical things, maybe it's combining two wildly different influences. I mean, pop music will have certain similarities. I like right now, every time I turn on Spotify, whether I ask for it or not, Sabrina Carpenter comes up, and I'm like, is this Taylor Swift? No, it's like there's a lot of similarities, but she obviously has her own very particular take on it. And then I can tell you that I love like late 70s punk rock. I'll have like a playlist of like 70 bands, and my wife is like, why do you listen to the same band all the time? I'm like, there's like 100 bands here.
If you listen closely, this one, yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly, because people who really, really appreciate a genre will love to dive into those nuances. Like if you listen to jazz music, it's not just like one particular type. There's all these subgenres within. If you listen to metal, it's not just like everyone doesn't sound like Metallica, or there's like black metal, there's death metal, there's speed metal, there's like all these variations, and you can bring your own kind of self into that as well.
Thank you.
And even if you don't worry about it. I think the biggest creativity killer is worrying about sounding like something that you maybe don't want to sound like, or worrying about what other people will think. Just try to get all that stuff out of your head and write music, and I think that's the best way to tap into your true creativity.
Yeah, and know that your songs can evolve over time. Just because you write something, record it, and release it, it's not like it has to be permanently that song. Maybe over time you're like, oh, you know what? Now I like to introduce these other elements. I mean, the cool thing about music these days is it costs very little, generally speaking, to record and publish music. So you can constantly revisit songs, or you could say, that one was done, that was my era like 2 years ago, and here's my new stuff, and you just constantly tinker. The more you write, the more you publish, the more comfortable you'll get, and the better sense you'll find of yourself.
Thank you.
Sure.
Hello.
Hi.
Okay. I was curious what your opinions on like A&R is, because I know you said that nobody really uses a label too much. I was interested in the job, but I don't really know if there's, like a need for it.
Well, A&R is still like a pretty critical component of labels. I think, generally speaking, labels have scaled back in that particular role. And what you find is people have almost like this fusion of roles. So many times a management company or management person will kind of field multiple roles. A&R is basically like an artist repertoire, like the recruiter for the label. I find a lot of labels, even major labels, will have someone that does marketing and A&R, or legal and A&R. In fact, these days, entertainment attorneys actually end up signing more attorneys or getting label deals than management companies. So the role itself is blended. If you want to work in A&R specifically, like in the procurement of artists, then I would say learn as much as possible about the craft itself, and also have a very, very good, keen understanding of music trends. In particular, like being able to understand like where the industry itself is heading in the next like 5-10 years, so that that skill set is like developing a very good ear for it, and that tends to be what labels look for. One of the better entry points into that role is actually just working with labels as like an intern. Unfortunately, these aren't well-paying, or sometimes they're no paying at all. But that's because most of these roles are relationship-based. And I had a good friend of mine, and she was a secretary for Sony and for Warner Music. And over time, she just became friends with the A&R crew. And over time, said like, oh, I listen to all these bands, you hear about this and that relationship blossomed, and she started doing some A&R work for the company itself. So those are probably some of the easiest ways to get in through the door for that particular job.
Definitely. Or contacting a few of the labels that you gel with the music that they produce and asking for an informational interview. Tell them just straight up, I'm looking to build a career as an A&R rep, and I'd love to have an informational interview, and then ask them, if you're able to get one of these interviews, just what are you looking for? Like, what should I study, or what should I build a background in that would make me a good candidate? And that would be an obvious way to get an internship, or just help show your initiative and motivation.
Yeah, and I would say one of the easiest ways to get in the door is be a content creator yourself in a way. So for example, like say, if you want to be a journalist of this, like, you know what, I'm going to launch a podcast of just A&R folks, and then I'm going to feature A&R reps and contact them and interview them. Because here's the thing, people love to talk about themselves and they love free publicity. So if you can provide that platform for them, it'll be fairly easy for you to like develop those relationships and become friendly with them. I ran a podcast for about 3 years on just the music industry, and it was like people didn't even care what I did. They didn't listen to the show, but I would be like, hey, I run Music Business Hacks. I'd love to talk to you and do like an interview. And I got tons of people, everyone from like Snoop Dogg's manager to 50 Cent to whoever, like punk bands like Misfits and Ramones to, it was just like, I don't think I ever got turned down. Like, owners of major labels were always like looking for the next thing to like chat. And so I was like, okay, I just like would love to hear your perspective. And as I was wrapping that particular show up, when our band was thinking about doing some work and working on a final record, I already had the in with a bunch of producers, and like we vibed really well on our podcast, and they're like, oh yeah, I'd love to like consult or like provide some help or listen to your tracks and give some feedback. Nowadays our band mostly, we're basically retired. We only reunited specifically for SAC Anime, but we run a nonprofit called the Slants Foundation, and I was able to leverage a lot of those relationships, and because we mentor a lot of artists, and I'd be like, hey, can you come in and provide some coaching work? And so we have like, A-list like vocal coaches like giving guidance to these artists, and A&R reps and managers and booking agents and attorneys, and I just realized very quickly, like, building that relationship through informational interviews, showing curiosity in the person really helped a lot.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Yeah, come on up.
I just wanted to ask, like, what is the best way to find opportunities in the industry? Or, like, is it good to go to college specifically for it, or, like, kind of that?
You mean to like work within like record labels and that sort of thing, or
Yeah.
in the production of music itself?
Oh, like music production, or, like, just becoming an artist? Like, does it help to go to college for that, or is it something, like what's the best way to find opportunities?
I'd say there's no right answer to this,
Yeah.
but we could throw some ideas at you. If any stick to the wall or that sound good, you are welcome to take them. I think Simon and I both went to college, and we studied things that did help our music career. I think my focus was more on audio engineering and media production. And along the way, those things came in really handy because we, as musicians, weren't making enough to hire people to do these things for us. So a lot of, almost all of the Slants albums we produced ourselves. And then as also marketing, which was Simon's focus. You had an earlier focus too in your.
Well, I also started with audio engineering,
right,
but
yeah.
I realized very quickly that I had kind of a knack for communications and marketing, and so then I ended up studying like business in schools, and was able to use that skill set in the context of the band. So
Yeah.
two very different pathways. My suggestion is like figure out like what you are uniquely good at and like how you can apply that particular lens to a music career, and don't focus on necessarily on like trying to be an expert at everything. Like figure out like where there are gaps in knowledge, and if you can learn your way into it, like great, but figure out how to develop relationships with people who maybe have an expertise that you lack, and that'll allow you to grow a lot quicker into this kind of industry. So if you are interested in being a performer, if you want to be like a creator, a writer, I would say like that's first and foremost your most important skill to develop. Like become the very best you can at your instrument, and I would say learn other instruments if possible. It never hurts to learn how to be a better singer, even if you don't sing. It never hurts to understand rhythm, like and percussion, because all these things will like make your overall craft better. And then figure out like, okay, aside from the art part, like of like being a very good performer and writer, what are the other areas that I need to be successful? So maybe it is learning how to navigate the business and the industry side of things. And maybe it's like understanding like, okay, how do I do booking? Because that's a very complicated thing. Most musicians absolutely hate booking. I know this because I used to do a lot of booking for other musicians. But like, the more you can kind of figure out, okay, what is my unique skill set, then you can really tap into that, and then maybe, collaborate with other folks for the areas where you are wanting a little more help on, or maybe just stuff that you just genuinely find interesting. Like I love like playing around with production techniques and studio techniques. It's just kind of fun to me. So I'm like, I'll just dive into this rabbit hole.
Yeah. I feel like Simon's business background helped the Slants significantly, because approaching your music and your career as a business really always put the Slants a step ahead of a lot of the other bands that we were friends with and working with.
Yeah, I mean, it just all kind of depends. But if you start with that goal, like where do I want to be, you can create like a list. Okay, if you want to be a professional performer, like a touring musician, that's a very different like skill set and list of requirements than
Sure.
a musician who wants to be in the studio. Like if you want to perform your own music versus somebody else's music, that's two different skill. There's a lot of
Sure.
overlapping things, but like really sit down and think like, what is it I actually want to do, and then from there you can start thinking of that list. You can look up information. There's a lot of great content online. There's really good books for it. One of my favorite books is The Guerrilla Guide to Music Marketing, because it actually breaks down many different aspects of that artist's career.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Yeah, come on up.
All right, this is a little different. I'm not a musician. I just want to support some of my family members that are.
Yeah.
And so what are the things that I can do to be an enabler? What are the things that are difficult for people starting out to, what are the resources that they need besides money, and besides a drummer, that they need to come up with? Because it seems everybody needs a drummer, and most of them want bass players. You already obviously covered that part. So what are the things that you would think they need to?
Well, you're doing a lot of it right now, being a supportive family member, coming up and asking the question. I think a lot of times saying, I want to be a musician, gets eye rolls with a lot of family members. And so, having a supportive structure behind you that is telling you, you could do it. Just the emotional side of this is incredible.
Yeah, I think definitely the emotional support is important, and I think also being able to share hard truths, but in a way that is still encouraging. Like, and if you don't know, it's okay to say, I don't know, but let me help you find the answer. Like if, say, they have a question about whether to do X or Y in their particular career. One of the things I will say, I love my parents, but they were not helpful at all in my particular career because they would constantly be like, when are you going to get a job? No one's going to marry you. Things like that. I would send them like DVDs of us playing for like thousands of people, and they're like, people pay money to see this? It was like, you know, in some ways, I would say the one thing that was helpful in that was like I wanted to prove them wrong. I wanted to prove that I could do this and I could sustain it, you know. But aside from that, I would say the things I wish I would have had is like rather than just like providing that negative thing, I would have preferred a little constructive criticism. Like, oh, you know what? Here, this is what might be helpful is like these books that I found online or this video series or an introduction to relationships that might be helpful. So one of the things that I oftentimes do nowadays through our nonprofit is as I'm mentoring artists and helping them coach in their careers, I'll try and introduce them to other entrepreneurs in other industries, because it helps to get them connected with similar mindsets of people who are very proactive about their crafts, people who take initiative. And the great thing is like you don't have to be all in on music. You can be hanging around with an inventor, like an app developer, a restaurateur, or someone else who's starting some kind of business in some kind of way. And the mindset is very similar across the board because you're all people who don't want to rely on traditional gatekeepers, people who need to understand how to level up their own skill sets, people who want to invest their money, time, and energy in a productive way and understand what return on investment looks like. That I find extremely helpful for anybody, but especially for aspiring musicians, because the encouragement part is very, very important, but having some kind of structure and accountability is also that other side of that coin.
Thank you.
I think there's a lot of physical things you could do as well. I mean, every musician would love to have someone watching their merch not get stolen during their show, you know, helping load gear. I mean, I think one of my best friends became like my lifelong drum tech. And he would come to every show, and he'd fix our guitars on stage. He would, you know.
He drove when we were too tired.
Yeah, you know, he just he cared about me and cared about us, and was always there for us, and still is. He's not at this show, but.
And the other thing he did was that he was such an enthusiastic supporter at every show. Like he was a genuine fan, not just like, hey, I'm here to provide help. Yeah. But his enthusiasm was so contagious at shows. Like, it's like weird when your own roadie is asking for an encore, but it would get the people around him excited, you know? It was like,
I mean, he would go through like the line outside to get in here today. He would go through those lines and say, hey, do you guys know about the Slants? Here's their you know, the pamphlet or the, you know, bill for their show. You should come. It's going to be really awesome. And, you know, every little, you know, bill that was handed out, and someone being like, well, our friend is like 20 years older than all of us. And so they're like, this old dude just handed me this bill. I think I should go to the show. It sounds fun.
Yeah, the energy is very contagious. So all those are many different ways in, but I would say like, but starting with that question is helpful. And then asking that person, how can I support you?
Yeah.
How can I help you? Or what do you need? And if I can't do it, who do I know that can help you?
Yeah.
Thank you. Oh, sure. One last thing.
Sure.
How do I find out more about your foundation?
Oh, you can go to theslants.org. It's just called the Slants Foundation. So if you Google that or go to theslants.org, you know, we've got a lot of resources for up-and-coming artists of all kinds.
Thank you.
Thanks. Hi.
I'm a student right now in college, and I'm learning how to do like recording arts. And I was wondering, all I want to do is just help artists make music, and how do I get into like that line of work to help in studios?
Yeah. So you said a recording artist or recording artists?
I'm sorry, I'm learning to do recording arts in college.
Oh, recording arts, yeah.
I'm learning how to be
Yeah,
in
yeah.
a studio.
Awesome. And you're kind of curious about how to get the work or like network?
Yeah, basically, I just want to help artists.
Yeah. Well, that's awesome. I mean, I think so many musicians don't have the technical know-how or equipment or knowledge to be able to record their music and produce great sounding work. And so I think getting your name out there can be like wildfire.
Oh.
When you start producing stuff and bands are like, oh, or musicians are like, who made that for you? Did you record that yourself? No, this is who I worked with. And so like word of mouth tends to be the best. And so if there's any local groups that you hear that you think, that they, or musicians that you think they have potential, reaching out to them to work with them, either free or reduced cost, is a great way to just start getting the momentum of that word of mouth.
There's also a lot of like people who are already working with bands who are always looking for help, and it might not be like super complex stuff. You might not be running the board. You might just be pulling cable and setting up stands, but developing that rapport with people. Because I will say the one thing about this industry is that you have a lot of people who have a hard time in consistently showing up on time, willing to work. And if you could be one of those people, you'll rise to the top very quickly, whether it's in the studio or working live rooms like with live audio engineers that do like event production or venues or that sort of thing. You can probably contact folks and ask if they, if they're willing to take on an intern or if you want help. And that's another good way to get in. One of our friends, Brandon Eggleston, started like as an intern. And now
he started working at Bear Creek Studios in Woodinville, Washington. And he was just an unpaid intern at the studio, and he was answering the phone and getting to talk to like Dave Grohl and Modest Mouse, and and then
he ended up like he worked on our record. He worked on like the Decemberists, the Shins, Mountain Goats, and he became like a preferred. All of a sudden the assistant was getting most of the calls for work because he was
personally.
He was just so great to work with, and would like get around.
And now he's like the Mountain Goats touring engineer, and he goes everywhere with them, whether it's Saturday Night Live or Kimmel or on tour all over Europe. And
so just developing that rapport, having a good work ethic is really important, and then being willing to put yourself out there and contacting bands. If you're at the college and you have access to the studio space and equipment, you can be like, hey, you can even come here and record. I got this great spot. Or meeting up with student groups, and like that could be another way to get in too.
Yeah, definitely. Do you have a studio at your college?
Yeah.
Awesome. That's very cool. I miss being in college and having access to a really good recording studio.
Yeah, you probably have awesome mics and things like that. So, believe me, bands are always looking for free studio time. So, or inexpensive studio time.
Yeah. So you have the value. They'll come to you. Just let them know.
Thank you.
Come on up.
Ooh, sorry. Public speaking, icky. I have thought about music for a while. Like I was that little 5-year-old that's like, I'm gonna be a child prodigy. And I'm gonna write a bunch of music and I'm gonna get famous by the time I'm 18. So not on track for that. How do you take the very first steps? I like writing lyrics. I consider myself a decent singer, and I just got gifted a guitar for free from an old teacher that I don't know how to play, and that is the extent of it. But I love listening to music, and I love the culture and like everything. So what do I do?
I would say you're already on the right track. I mean, the first step with art is fall in love with art. And the more you learn about it and dive into it, the better. And then the second part is, developing the skill set. So if you got a guitar, learn the guitar. Get lessons if you can. Same thing if, I know professional opera singers who still get professional vocal training. So it's just constantly growing that skill set. And same thing with like, if you want to be a songwriter and a performer, then do that. It's kind of funny. A lot of people are like, how do I become this? It's like, it's not like one day you just wake up and you are that. You just have to start doing what it is. If you want to be a musician, play music. If you want to be a singer, sing. If you want to be a songwriter, write as much content as possible. Be willing to throw the stuff away or save a file that maybe you'll come back to 10 years later, and just go through that process again and again and again. In the same way that, like, if you wanted to be a professional chef, you don't just wait until you get the opportunity to work at a fine dining restaurant. You got to make a lot of really bad or mediocre meals before you get to that point. I think it's so often the case where us as musicians and artists, we're like, it has to be perfect. And I would say, no, you just have to learn something each time you do it so you get a little bit better. In the same way that your first couple songs might not be as great as the songs you write the next 10 songs or the 10 after that. But like, try and figure out like, what is the process? How can I document the things I like from this and deconstruct it in a way where you can take those same techniques and continue to grow that base. That's probably like the entryway into the on-ramp into like getting into the world of writing and performing. And then if you do want to perform, I would say get on stage as much as possible. There's like...
Take all the bad gigs and just do them.
Yeah. Open mics, wineries, restaurants, whatever. There's so many musicians who actually think they're great performers, and then really, they're like, to be a world-class performer, it's a whole other thing. Like, you got to have like thousands of shows under your belt to really, really understand and feel comfortable with who you are as a performer, to learn how to interact with an audience, how to command their attention. There's all these other facets that go beyond just playing a guitar well or singing a song well. So that's another like set of skills that you just kind of start growing into.
Even just setting up on stage, which shows where you have other performers on the bill, we can always tell who's been doing it a really long time and who hasn't, because it's just that professionalism that you grow from experience of setting up your gear quickly or getting your gear off stage quickly, and troubleshooting, making sure that your equipment's working. If mic's not working, being able to communicate with the sound crew and just all these little things that you just learn from doing it, and then it's not as big of a deal. And when you do start getting the bigger gigs, then it's more natural.
Yeah, and then the other thing is that whether you want to do this like solo or as part of a group, I would always recommend trying to join bands or playing with them as much as possible, because learning to perform with other musicians is a different skill set too, like learning how to read each other and play off of each other, improvise. So the more you can do that, the more it'll really help accelerate your growth as a performer.
Yeah. Oh, woo. Thank you.
Absolutely.
I'm sure I'm going to think of another question as soon as I sit back down.
No worries. Come on up.
Yeah, come back up then.
At least in the next 15 minutes until the next panel. I think that's been 15.
Yeah. Anybody else?
I just wanted to ask, like, what kind of equipment would you recommend getting for like starting to like record a song? Because like I have like a microphone and I play guitar and I can plug that into the computer, but like there's all like the recording software and like the extra details you have to add to actually make one and like put it on Spotify. So I was just kind of
Sure.
wondering more about that.
That's a great question. I think you could start with the least expensive or something that's included with your computer, or I mean, if you have a Mac, GarageBand is fantastic. I mean, there's gold albums that are created on GarageBand. If you don't have a Mac, what's the I'm trying to think.
Neither of us are PC users anymore.
Cakewalk, I think is
It does like synths and stuff. Well, anyway, you can find like Ableton's not free, but for a PC version, well, I mean,
or
like you
least
can.
expensive.
A lot of times you can find them, or you can get free trials of things, like even trial versions of Ableton, Pro Tools. So do you have like a Mac computer or?
I have Windows.
Windows, okay.
Okay. Adobe has one too. But in any case, you can find the software. I would just say like just start with any kind of software that allows you to do multi-track recording.
multi-track.
Like you can add guitar, vocals. You can add more. A lot of times I'll have drum samples. I would say literally anything that gets you into the process of recording, because the more you do that, the more you start learning like, oh, if I play it a certain way, if I sing a certain way, it'll change the sound. If I move these knobs or add these effects, this is how it'll bring the life to the song in a different kind of way. That's the more important thing, is this mindset of creativity and experimentation. And then you can make a fairly inexpensive purchase. Like you can get an audio interface like Fire Studio or any number of things for about $200, and that's another way to like plug in better quality microphones and instruments. And a lot of times they'll come with a limited version of like a very professional version of what we call a DAW, digital audio workstation. So that'd be like Pro Tools or Ableton or something like that. And that's where you'll get even more tools to play with in terms of the sound.
Yeah. But Audacity, that's what I was trying to. Yeah, I have a friend that just recorded an album on Audacity, and it sounds fantastic. So, and it's doing really well on Spotify. So, there you go. I would say like any way that you can cleanly record the tracks, and even if you can't, afford all the expensive plugins, you could, after you've tracked everything and done basic editing, like, chosen the best vocal parts or the, kind of edited together your, best guitar lines or keyboard lines and everything, you could take all those tracks and bring them to someone who has experience mixing and maybe has more plugins, even if they're an amateur, and have them help you put together mixes that are maybe beyond what your software can do.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
My question is, when do you know when your music is good enough to share?
I would say when you're proud enough and okay with letting it go. Simon and I have, over the years, had differing opinions on that. Simon is more of like, let's get it out there, and I'm more of like, oh, I could like edit this until my eyes bleed, and like in 3 years maybe it'll be ready. So like, for me, I needed someone like Simon in my life to get my stuff out there because it was good enough. And maybe Simon needed someone like me to be like, no, we should edit this a little bit more.
I mean, it's just, there's differing perspectives, but I would say it depends on what your goal is. Because it's like, if you're just trying to create as much art as possible and getting it into the world, then letting it go is fine, because it can always get better. Now, if you want to wait until it's like absolutely perfect, I will say nothing you ever do will reach that standard.
Yeah.
Every artist that's out there, even the Beatles are like, we wish we can change our original records, even though it's made them, multimillionaires. And because as an artist, you're always growing. You're always going to, like, the technology will change. You're going to get new ideas, and you're going to want to continue to tinker. And we could sit there tinkering all day, but it doesn't get people interacting with your art. And so that's why I'm generally of the mindset, if it's good enough, if you feel like good enough about it, let it out into the world and let the market decide. If people are like, this sucks, then you're like, okay, I got to make this better. If people do like it and you still want to improve on it, at least you know like there are elements that you produced or wrote or did whatever that people grab onto, where it's enough to encourage you to make more in that style or in that writing.
But if you like it, someone else is bound to like it too. So I would say, like, as soon as you're comfortable letting it go, put it out there.
All right, thank you.
Sure, thanks. You know, Tyler, I've got a question for you.
Okay.
What do you think is like the biggest lesson you learned personally as a musician from after touring and playing and recording? Like, what is something that you feel like was most helpful for you, or that you wish you learned in the beginning that you wish other people knew?
I think when I first started playing, I had a day job, and the day job was really tough on getting out there. Later on, like after I started getting into real estate and having passive income from real estate, I was like, man, why didn't I do this back when? I mean, I know that's something that is not an option for everyone, but being able to buy a house and rent out a part of it, or rent out the thanks, renter, or rent out the whole thing as passive income, I think would have taken a lot of stress off of making ends meet for the music, and that's something I wish I did earlier.
So to me, it sounds a lot like what I tell aspiring artists, is to put as much of your creativity into the business parts or the non-artistic parts of your career as you do in the arts part.
Yeah.
Because that creativity allows you to solve problems much faster and more effectively. Like, how do I make money when maybe the gigs aren't quite there?
Totally, yeah. I mean, I think one of the most difficult things is continuing a music career when it's hard to afford to live the lifestyle you want to live and also do this. And so, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Do you have a question?
Hello. I heard that you guys are from Portland.
Yeah.
And I was wondering what that was like, being an Asian American band growing up in that community.
Yeah, definitely.
And when your band makes a little bit more success, how do you maintain artistic integrity amongst all the noise?
Yeah.
Well, so I didn't grow up in Portland. I moved there as an adult, but I can say, Portland has a nickname. They call it America's whitest major city. And it was tough. I mean, especially when we launched as a band, we were one of the only Asian American artists out there in the mid-2000s. Social media wasn't really like what it is now. And at times, it was difficult. Like, even though our band had success here and there, like I remember after one of our music videos debuted on Conan O'Brien's Team Coco, I was booking a tour, and people were like, well, the music's great, but who'd want to see an Asian band? And I'd be like, why does it even matter? Like, there's these unique challenges that we had to face at the time that I understand still exist, but maybe not as much. So what helped me a lot was like tapping into the community, working with local organizations, finding other folks who understood that experience. That made it easier, more comfortable to live in a place like that.
Yeah. One of the advantages is that whenever an Asian band would come like on tour, we would get offered to open for them, like famous bands, and so we got to play with some really, really cool bands.
Whether it made sense musically or not.
Like their music style is nothing like ours, but okay, we'll play the show.
Yeah, so there are ways to try and leverage that.
Yeah, definitely. And as far as the noise, just don't read the comments on YouTube. It's always terrible.
Thank you.
I think this X means we're out of time, and it's like another panel
All
time.
right. Well, thank you guys
Yeah,
so
thank you
much
for
for
joining
coming
us.
out, and thank you for all the great questions. And
We have a storytelling and songs presentation tonight at 9, and then a folk band concert tomorrow at 9. It's the only one we're playing this year, so hope you come out and join us. All right, thanks.